大家好，我是 ACM 萌专访，这是ACM 萌专访节目，我是特邀主持人嘉宾涂成彪。今天我们很高兴请来了 Amie Hoeber， 他是马里兰州第六区共和党联邦众议员候选人。我们欢迎 Amie 到我们的 studio。 Welcome, Amie.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
First of all, when we start the interview, I want to congratulate on your big convincing win. You won by let's see, the 69.5% of the vote from Republican.
I like to say almost 70%.
Almost 70. Yes. Congrats again.
Thank you.
So we know that you are facing the Democrat nominee, David Trump, in the November election. So before we touch that point, can you briefly introduce yourself and tell us what propelled you to come out to run for this position?
My name is Amie Hoeber, and I was the nominee for this position the last cycle. I am again today, and I hope to win this because I believe I can best represent this district. I'm a national security expert by background. I'm also a small business owner. I founded my own small defense consulting firm about 25 years ago, and it has been very successful, and I'm pleased with that. I'm an expert on nuclear, chemical, and biological warfare defense. I was Deputy Undersecretary of the Army for 6 years a number of years ago, where I ran all the Army research and development. I'm also a lifelong advocate for women. I have served for more than a decade on the House of Ruth, Maryland, helping women who are in need of assistance. And I also mentor a number of younger women in the defense business and those interested in starting their own companies. And that's the sum. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I'm a stepmother. I've raised one son of my own and 5 stepsons. So it's been a full life.
That's great. Our community is very excited to see 2 very strong candidates come out to run for the position. And I know that you're a Republican candidate. What is your major campaign issues?
Well, my major issues stem from my knowledge of the district. I have learned the district in a great deal of depth over the last several years. I think first there is a major transportation problem. People here in Montgomery County seem to think that it's primarily the I-270 corridor, but there are transportation issues throughout the district. There's I-81 in Washington County. There's Route 220 out further west. There are 3 bridges in Cumberland that are crumbling and need to be fixed. There are major transportation infrastructure problems, and that's my first plank. My second one is addressing the opioid addiction problem, which continues to be a very bad problem throughout the district, with a number of deaths every year from overdoses. I've been working with a particular program in Frederick at a place called The Ranch, which is a treatment center for recovering addicts. I've also worked with other programs throughout the district. There are 2 in Hagerstown. There is a new one in Cumberland, and there are additional treatment options in Frederick. I think that needs to be addressed at a number of issues, at a number of levels. We need to tackle the distribution of drugs. We even need to tackle the big pharma indifference to some of the drug trafficking that's happening, and we need to provide treatment for those who are looking to escape their addiction problems. That's the second plank. The third is the usual jobs and business development. Here in Montgomery County, that's a particular issue because, as I'm sure you know, we've only had 6 new businesses net in the last 5 years. And you compare that to Fairfax County right across the river, which is a very similar county in many respects, where they've had thousands of new new jobs?
My number is over 7,000.
Okay,
So
it was
it's
a lot.
quite a big difference.
Quite a big difference, and we need to fix that. Governor Hogan has done a lot of things here in Maryland to increase job development, to increase the number of businesses by reducing regulations and reducing fees and things like that. And there's a new website that's been started recently by the state to help new businesses get started. But we still need to do more, particularly in the 6th Congressional District, which is the district I'm running in.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you're endorsed by Governor Hogan.
I'm endorsed by Governor Hogan. I know him. I work with him. I've developed my transportation plan in conjunction with what he's doing. Mm-hmm. And we can get to that in more detail because I go far beyond what my opponent has suggested for transportation improvements. And then the final well, there are two more real planks on my platform. The first is increasing safety and national security, and that comes from my background and my expertise. But I'm really trying to address everything from school safety and group gathering safety, because schools aren't the only gathering point targets. There are other potential targets. And then translating that into national security, because many of those issues are in fact national security issues like border control.
Right.
And then my final and probably most important point is I want to bring back a sense of civility back to Congress. I think we have become so divisive and so stalemated that my background in being able to bring people together to solve problems could really help. And I would like to get Congress back addressing things with a sense of empathy and cooperation and a bipartisan search for common ground and making progress.
Great.
On that.
So 5 major points, if I may repeat. First of all, transportation,
Yes.
and opioid epidemic, job and business opportunity, and safety and national security, and also bring civility back
Right.
to politics.
And that overarches all of the rest of them.
Fantastic.
We're only going to be able to make progress on the substantive issues if we can address them with empathy and cooperation as our key approach.
Okay, thank you. We're going to probably touch some of the points later on.
Okay.
So you can talk detail about how you plan to do it. Next is obviously lots of people are interested is you and David Trong finally are the 2 candidates compete for the position. And David Trong won the Democratic Party primary by 40% of the vote from Democratic Party. His account of the vote is about 22,000. And as far as I know from the campaign report, he spent $10.2 million just to win the primary. I did the simple math. It's about $458 per vote. That is an expensive campaign.
Well, and I think it's interesting when you look at last August, he made a statement that yes, he had spent $13 million on his run in a different district where he lost last time. And he wasn't going to do that again.
Right.
And then, of course, he turned it around and did it again. I think that says something about how much you can believe what he says.
So for the viewers who is not really into politics, my understanding is even if you don't change your address, you can decide to run for the district that even not in where you live.
That's correct. Maryland law allows anyone to run in any district in Maryland. You only have to be a state resident and of a certain age.
Right.
And both David and I are of that age.
Yes, yes. So back to your opponent, David Trong. What do you think that you are better, in your campaign or in your issues? How you think that you're going to win your opponent?
I think it's a difference in what I bring to this race. I'm the only candidate for this position that has federal government experience. I was, as I said, Deputy Undersecretary of the Army, and I've worked for the government all my life. I understand how the government works. I understand how they manage money. I manage $4 or $5 billion a year that came across my desk when I was in the Pentagon. I also think I'm the only candidate that can understand how the government allocates money and therefore have a better potential ability to get federal resources directed to this district. I think that's something that I have that no one else has. I'm also the only candidate with a long and proven record of advocacy for women. I think this compares a great deal with my opponent's approach, which I find dismissive of both women and minorities. I also am the only candidate who has a deep understanding and commitment to this district. The fact that my opponent ran in a different district last time and is now running in this time strikes me as being district shopping rather than a commitment to the constituents.
Got it. Okay. So I know that we're going to talk about your campaign issues, but before I decide to run this interview, lots of my friends say, "Oh, you got to ask Amie Hoeber about certain things they care about." So do you mind if we ask you about the things that the Chinese American community?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm here to listen.
Okay.
I am never here just to talk. I go to lots of groups. And my objective is, after I'm elected, I will represent everyone, so I need to understand everyone's concerns and issues.
That's great. So I'm going to just go ahead and raise those issues. First of all, my personal favorite, obviously, is sanctuary Maryland or our immigrant system issues. Should the United States have an open border? Because lots of people from Democrat side start to push for that agenda is they feel like, hey, we're such a great country, we need to welcome everyone, people can come and go freely, we shouldn't have a border to restrict their movement. And whether and how to reform our current immigration system, that's follow up with that yes or no question. Please.
Well, as I've said, this is a complicated issue, and I think needs to be approached with both empathy and a feeling of law enforcement. We are, of course, a country of immigrants. My mother was a first-generation immigrant from Italy, and she came over quite legally. The issue is that we shouldn't, in my view, have open borders today. We have a legal system for allowing immigrants to come in. It involves everything from standing in line for visas to applying for refugee or asylum status. And all of my views are that the laws should be followed. We are not just a country of immigrants, we're also a country of laws. And I think the difference between legal and illegal immigrants is like the difference between shopping and shoplifting. One of them is a proper way of doing things, and one of them is not. And I do not favor sanctuary cities. I think that denigrates our respect for law in general. And I do not favor open borders. If there are suggested revisions to the current immigration laws, that's fine, let's consider them. There are ways to change law, and there are ways to consider alternatives. But simply violating law is, in my view, it's un-American. It's not my value.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So, if you're elected, do you have any initiative on reforming? Because it seems like everyone agreed that our current immigration system is broken, needs some reform. Do you have any initiative that you're currently thinking of to reform our immigration system?
The first thing that I would do is ensure that families are allowed to stay together. I realize that there are procedures that need to be followed when someone comes and crosses the border with a family and is applying for refugee or asylum status. And there is a process, and during that time of the processing, one does have to be detained. But there's no reason we can't detain a family as a unit rather than splitting children and parents. I mean, I'm a mother. Somebody ever tried to take my child away from me, I'd be horrified and hysterical, and I'd go into what in my world we would call the mama tiger syndrome. You know, nobody touch my kid, thank you. And I'm very much along that line, and I don't want to see the families separated. So I would put as my first initiative establishing family centers where people can remain while the process is being done.
Okay, great. Next question is very specific to Asian Americans. It's a topic called Asian American subcategorization.
Yes.
And, you know, lots of people actually don't know what that is, but it is very much sort of a special topic that is so cared in this community because there's a trend in the at the state level. They try to propose to subcategorize the Asian American into like Chinese, Taiwanese, Vietnamese, Filipino,
Korean,
so that yes, the counter argument is Asian American is the smallest among four major races in America, and it's just waste of lots of resource to subcategorize this, and also people feel like we're all Americans, and why we need to be singled out and treated differently. There are lots of counter argument. So first of all, I'd like to hear your general viewpoint on this, and then I'm going to start asking specific questions.
Okay, my general viewpoint is that I don't understand why it's being done. We don't do that to other minority groups such as Hispanics, where we don't distinguish between, say, Caribbean or Mexican or Venezuelan or any of the other subgroups that could be divided. So I don't understand why it's being done for the Asian Americans in the proposed census questionnaire, and I would certainly ask. It has only recently come to my attention as a concern, and I will certainly, as a candidate, check up on
So
why
even
it's
as a
being
candidate,
done.
so just for the viewer to know that I actually print out the census questionnaire for 2020. Under that, on page 11, they ask for white, for African American or black, or Hispanic. They can check, say, I am white or I'm black without specify their race or detail subcategory. But for Asian Americans, there's no such category as Asian American. You have to specify either you're Chinese, Taiwanese, Filipino, or other different subcategories. So this is obviously single out Asian American for a special treatment. We don't know whether it's good or bad. Before the interview, I asked Amie what she think about this and how she planned to do. So that was you plan to call the administration and ask them why
it's being done, so that I understand the rationale on both sides.
Right.
And then I'll come back and talk to you about what I think and see what all the arguments are.
Okay, great. And the number 3 question is on the education policy. So basically, public education, the American tradition is mostly at the local issue. It's at the county level. However, we do have a Department of Education that set out certain policies so that every county in the United States will follow certain policy guidelines. And recently, there are a couple of major issues that Chinese American community care. One is Department of Education, Secretary of Education decided to withdraw many policies that have racial component or set racial preference policy to African American and Hispanic American. These policies are withdrawn and instead refer to the court cases that prefer racial blind policy in public education. That's one. Second is the Student for Fair Admission that is based in Arlington, Virginia, is having a case against Harvard University on its admission policy. First of all, argue for transparency in its admission criteria. Second is challenge the fact that Harvard keep the Asian American student percentage stable while see the population of applicants, Asian American student admission doubled, but they still, so they suspect there's some racial discrimination going on in its admission policy, and recently found that they actually intentionally put one factor really low without even interview Asian American student. They assume they want to keep the percentage lower. So the case will be in November in the court. We want to see more on that. So we'd like to hear your thought on those things.
Okay. Both my parents were teachers in the public school system where I grew up, and I'm very much in favor of keeping education control at the local level. For example, I oppose Common Core. I think that this interferes with the relationship between teachers and students and prevents the teachers from doing as good a job as they otherwise could do. I don't know anything, of course, about the Harvard case. We'll wait for the trial or whatever procedure there is to deal with it. But I'm very much in favor of a meritocracy-based program for college admission. The school that I'm most familiar with is MIT. My husband's on the board of MIT and interviews applicants to MIT from this area. And MIT is largely based on pure meritocracy. Not 100%. They reserve some spots in their classes for underrepresented minorities, but that varies. And believe me, the Asian American community at MIT is not a minority. That's probably the largest single group there, and they do splendidly. I think that the focus on education really needs to be on allowing everyone to achieve the best they can. And I think one of the problems with public education is that it doesn't any longer allow that freedom. And we need to readjust our priorities. We're holding back some of the kids that are really talented in ways that I think are negative. I think we're also not encouraging those that need more help in ways that are productive. We're teaching them how to do testing better, but we're not teaching them how to do learning better, in my view. And I think a large part of this is a decrease in the after-school activities, which are broadening for all children and teach them, there's a whole world out there and all sorts of options, and they need to know something about all of them. And we need to think about helping everyone to have an opportunity to achieve. And I think that's the main point. Now, I've recently done some studying of things like voucher systems, things like the Arizona practice of private accounts for parents to make the decisions on education. I think there are lots of ways that the parents' judgment on their children and the children's needs need to be paid more attention to. Now that also involves, I think, teaching the parents what the options are, what the alternatives are in terms of pros and cons of the different options, and then helping the parents make the right choices for their children.
So the meritocracy and also family's involvement is very important.
I think basically if you don't have family involvement in education, we are not going to be able to solve the problems.
Okay.
I mean, that's where it all starts.
Thank you. Number 4 question is on the Second Amendment. Obviously, our community haven't talked about that in great detail, but as lots of people are parents, when the what happened in Florida really concerned the parents is on the school safety. And then obviously when discussion going on, it started to touch the Second Amendment. And what is your position and how you solve the current situation?
Well, the first thing I would do, for example, is address the issue of protecting the schools. I think, for example, the Sandy Hook case and the Florida case, in both cases, the schools were not even locked. I would start procedures where schools are locked and people can't just wander in. And I'm a Second Amendment supporter. I own guns and I'm a good shot. On the other hand, there do need to be reasonable restrictions. I think the most important restriction is to strengthen our ability to do serious background checks. It wouldn't have stopped those instances because in those cases the shooter was not the person that owned the gun and had bought the gun, so it wouldn't necessarily have been able to be useful there. But I do think we need far better background checks. We need the states to cooperate better in providing data to the federal system for the background checking, and we need to modify some of the laws that prevent negative information on people's intents from getting into those background databases. That's the first thing I would do. There may be some other restrictions that make sense. I'd have to look at a particular one, but we're now getting to an age where a 3D printer can be used to create a gun.
Yeah.
And that's going to be sort of very hard to control. Are we going to ban 3D printers, for example, just because they can be used that way? I think the real key is dealing with the human side of it. For example, looking at the incident that happened in Annapolis here with the news, the Gazette. It was known that the shooter was an unstable person, and yet nobody did anything to protect people from him. We need to have more sensitivity. It's not that I want neighbors spying on neighbors. I mean, that's a whole different issue. But certainly when there are records of people making threats, it needs to be taken seriously. And we do need to pay attention.
Thank you. Just follow on that issue. Seems like I've been in this country for 23 years. I did observe that our population start to change, and people, I don't know, small portion of people start get angrier. Somehow, don't know why, but back to one of your campaign issues, opioid epidemic issues, because this issue actually is not necessarily our community concerned the most, but as part of this interview, I would also introduce the general American society's issue to our viewers, because we are all Americans. What I feel like we need to care about what's going on in our society. Could you briefly talk about this particular epidemic and why it is such a big issue to our country?
Well, are you talking about the opioid epidemic or the issue?
Opioid epidemic. It's also related to people's, so we have people get angry. We also have people get upset. I think this is one of the major issues that cause, especially young people, get upset or don't have love from family. They start to get addicted to the epidemic.
Well, I mean, there are many reasons why people become addicted. I held a town hall in Frederick in either January or February. Believe me, in a campaign, you lose track of time.
I was there.
You were there.
Yeah.
And I had a number of former addicts that were there that talked about the role of other things to do. And the fact that in many ways the lack of after-school activities is a problem in that it leaves too many children, too many teenagers, too many young adults that are still in school with too much free time on their hands. And it's easier for them to get in trouble that way than when we had more options for them after school. Things to do like clubs and sports and things that used to be sponsored by communities and schools are no longer as easy to come by as they were in the days of yore. But that's part of it. But there are other parts. There are people who become addicted because they are prescribed opioids for a reason. And in that case, we need to continue to do research on alternative pain treatments. We need to consider, treating people with shorter prescriptions if it's appropriate. I mean, if you go in for surgery, you don't need to come out of there with a prescription for 30 days worth of opioids. Right. Usually a week will do, and maybe even less. And if you have too many of the pills circulating around, it's too easy for people to get a hold of them. But the part that really scares me is not so much the prescribed opioids, but the fact that there's a lot of illegal fentanyl and other drugs floating around. And that I call a national security problem, because most of those drugs come across the border. And that's part of border control. And if we went to open borders, we might even lose more control of what we're doing there.
Everything's interconnected.
Everything's interconnected.
Yes. Regarding that, I actually, there was about a month or two ago, I went to DC to meet my friend in very early morning in a weekday. So I came back across the American Legion Bridge on a weekday morning. I was so surprised because I didn't travel for quite some time that I was driving like on an airport runway, one direction, but the other direction is a parking lot. So I know that transportation is, and business, that reflect two things. One is transportation, obviously we have congestion one way, or both ways in the weekend. Second is business, right? Lots of people go to Virginia to work.
Because that's where the jobs are.
Yes. So let's touch the first question first. The transportation. I know you have some proposal on the 495 American Legion Bridge. Do you want to elaborate?
No, I've been thinking about this for a long time and developed in the last election cycle a comprehensive plan for the entire district, which addressed all of the different traffic problems, particularly the American Legion Bridge. And that's particularly appropriate for a congressperson because it involves crossing a state line. And it will require cooperation between the District of Columbia and Virginia and Maryland. A long time ago there was a proposal to build a second bridge. And that has gone by the wayside for a variety of reasons, a lot of them environmental, and reasonably so. I think the solution to the American Legion Bridge is to double deck it. Now, I'm not a traffic engineer, and I need to get some real advice here. But conceptually, I have seen bridges be double-decked both in New York City and in San Francisco. I remember watching the San Francisco Bay Bridge while it was being double-decked when I was young. I think that could be done on the American Legion Bridge with less environmental impact than building a second bridge. And sure, we'd have problems during the construction, but we've got problems today, and at least we have a potential solution. So in Congress, that's certainly some things that I would propose.
Great. So now back to the economic development. I know that you touched that point, and because you have a great relationship with beloved Governor Hogan, and you probably have lots of communication with Hogan on how to develop this particular region, right? He has proposed to reduce regulations, same as your idea, things like that. Is there any specific project or initiative you're thinking of if you're elected?
Well, one of the things that I've helped do in Montgomery County in particular was I helped open one incubator facility for new businesses looking to do business with the government. We have a lot of government contractors in Congressional District 6, and there are a lot of small new government contractors there, and I helped open an incubator to teach them how to deal with government requests for proposals and requests for quotes, and that should help grow at least some of the small businesses. That's a Montgomery problem in particular. There's also an incubator that has been started in Frederick quite recently called Root, and that's essentially a facility that allows new businesses to form and find temporary workspace before they get on their feet and can, proceed onwards on their own. A lot of work needs to be done to bring more to Hagerstown, needs more to Cumberland, more to the more western towns in Congressional District 6. And I've worked jointly with some small businesses, particularly in Garrett County, to link them up with bigger businesses I know in the Washington metropolitan area, so they can be subcontractors on work for the government, because that's my area of expertise, and I can facilitate those arrangements, acquaintances, and proceed onwards. So I will continue to do that. I've done it since I first started running in the last cycle. And I will do everything I can to link up the small businesses, encourage the small businesses, try and find new ways of bringing business. There's actually been a recent proposal to consider building a sports arena in Hagerstown, under the thought that that will bring in more business. You look at the vibrancy that building the sports arena here in Southwest Washington did, and you can imagine if you could get half of that in Hagerstown, it would make a major difference.
Yes, that's a fresh idea. That actually first time I heard it. Thank you. So next question is more broader. So what is your general assessment of the current state of our country, and also in your district, which is District 6, covers the entire Western Maryland, and also Frederick County, and also west side of the Montgomery County?
Yeah, it runs essentially from the intersection of River Road and the Beltway all the way out through Deep Creek Lake in Garrett County.
Right, it's a huge area.
It's a huge area. We put 30,000 miles on the car during the last campaign, and I think we'll exceed that this time. But it's also it's a fascinating area. I love it. The diversity of the cultures within the district, the diversity of the people, I find fascinating, and it's just great fun for me. I was walking in a parade the other day and probably shook hands with 1,000 people before it was over.
Right.
And this is what I love about campaigning, is getting out and talking to the people, finding out what they care about. But the state of the world, I mean, I could talk about it from a national security point of view. I could talk about it from a civility point of view.
Yeah, civility. Actually, so one of the observation I had, since I've been here for 23 years is, seems like people are easily agitated nowadays. We talk among friends, people are attribute to social network or media and all these, but fundamentally we are human beings. We actually control our own behavior. So I obviously a strong advocate to call back this civility, because I feel people are entitled to their own viewpoint.
Sure.
And we should have a atmosphere or venue for people to friendly exchange those viewpoints, and at the worst is agree to disagree. But seems like we're keep yelling at each other and not talk about substance.
Well, I try and stop yelling. I believe we can disagree without being disagreeable, and I've felt that way all my life. I think I have lived that way all my life, and I hope to continue. And I think the best way to help that is by example. And I will continue to try and be an example of civility and encourage others to. I mean, I had an exchange the other week with an old high school friend of mine who disagrees vehemently with me on political issues, and that's fine. And he was being very insulting on social media, and I finally wrote him a note, and I've forgotten the exact wording, but I said, look, you know, let's agree to disagree, but not be disagreeable. You know, and it took him 2 days, and he finally wrote back and said, "I'm sorry, you're right." And we have carried on a conversation on the issues ever since in a very civil manner.
It happens to our community as well. So I'm glad you brought up the issue, and I personally very appreciate that you want to do something about it. This is about the policy part of the interview. Next, obviously, is about your personal and family. Could you tell us a little bit about your life experience, your family, on the personal side?
Well, as I said earlier, I grew up with two parents being teachers, and I must say I'm sympathetic to all of the Asian Americans here who go to Saturday schools, because my mother, as a teacher, made me essentially go to my home school on Saturdays, and I always had to do a certain amount of learning before I was allowed to go out and play.
So your family paid lots of attention to education.
Absolutely. I mean, and I went to summer school almost every summer, and when I wasn't in summer school, my mother kept trying to teach me French. I didn't learn French very well. I'm not language talented, but it was a culture of you do your work and then you can go and play. And this was what I was grown up with. I grew up in a very nice little town in California, Santa Barbara, which I enjoyed tremendously. It was a small town in those days, and it was a nice place to grow up. I was about 2 miles away from the beach.
Yeah, I was there a year ago, and my wife and I said, if we could retire there, that would be fantastic.
It's a great town. It's a great retirement town. Frankly, I got out of there as soon as I could, because it is a retirement town in many ways and was boring for a teenager. And I got out and went to school at Stanford, and then came back here to Washington. Most of my Stanford group, the group I ran around with, ended up wanting to work for government, wanting to work for the good of the country. We were all inspired in those days by the Peace Corps, by President Kennedy's words, by the importance of being an American and participating in the growth of the country. And so most of us ended up back here in Washington in one way or another. I got out of Stanford and went to my favorite professor and said, this is all very nice and good, and how do I pay my rent next week? And started working for the defense industry, because that was the only job I got offered. It wasn't my original intent. In fact, I'm not even sure I really had an original intent. It was just proceed. And I stayed working at that. And as I have occasionally said, it was a hard job for a woman. It was very much an old boys club. The first professional meeting I went to was 3,000 men and me. The advantage, of course, was that I got remembered.
Yes, you had the attention.
I had the attention in that sense. I had a lot of very good male mentors. I didn't have any women mentors. There simply weren't any senior women in the business. And so that's sort of one reason why I feel it a moral obligation to mentor the younger women in the defense world. And I helped start a group. As a matter of fact, I won an award a month ago from one of my industry groups for being a good mentor to the younger women.
So you're a trailblazer in that sense.
Yes, I broke a number of glass ceilings. And when I was in the Pentagon, I was one of the very senior women there. There were 3 or 4 of us in those days. We had broken through a little bit, and it was, it's been an interesting experience. As I said, I raised stepchildren, and had one of my own, and I have, been a successful stepmother and mother. They're all,
they're all grown now, right?
Well, we lost one, actually, but the rest of them are all grown, successful, doing well. My grandson is 16 and absolutely the light of my life. and my hobby is glass blowing. I blow glass with my grandson. We share that hobby and have done that together now for almost 10 years. And so that's lots of fun.
That's great. And obviously, when we talk about your personal side, I can't help but mention Mark. He's a very successful business executive
Right.
at Qualcomm,
Qualcomm.
and he actually drive you around.
Yes. No. When I started running for office, he cut down to half-time officially, and so he's half-time on my campaign with me, and is one of my chief advisors.
So my daughter, she is 14. You know, when we ask around casually, say, "Hey, where you want to go for college?" So he, after toured Harvard and MIT, I thought she was gonna choose Harvard, but she said no, MIT. And then we talk about Mark. He is on the board of MIT,
Yeah.
but Mark also told me that no, wait a minute, I also have other liaison with Harvard
Right.
and Stanford.
Right. No, he. We didn't actually meet in those days, but he was at Stanford reasonably close to the same time I was. He was doing his graduate work in electrical engineering, and so our paths didn't cross, but that was fine. But he's connected to MIT, Harvard, and Stanford. And I'm a Stanford person, but I've done a lot of work with MIT as, helping him in his role there.
Great. Thanks for your sharing your personal side of so that the viewer will know more a little bit more about you. The last question is, I think you will have lots of supporters from the Chinese American community. How they could help?
Well, obviously the things I need are votes,
Mm-hmm.
and so the issue is how can you help get me votes? And I have been immensely pleased with the support I have from your community. There are several of the Asian American gals who've been outdoor knocking for me on a regular basis, and I'm just deeply appreciative. And besides, they're all good people, and I have fun with them.
Right.
I mean, I've been delighted to go to people's houses for a meal, and I think the real thing is spread the word. I am who I am. I think I'm the best representative for this district. I think I have a proven commitment to this district and its people, and I think I bring the experience and the capabilities that the district needs.
Okay, so in other way is if a particular family who are interested to meet Amie and her husband, you are very welcome. Or if you're a good cooker or brewer, you can prepare a nice meal and invite your friend, and Amie Hoeber will show up in your house and tell you more about her sort of campaign platform, and also make friends and have fun.
Right. No, it's been a fascinating experience. I love people. I have always been a people person, and this is a delightful way to meet people and learn how I can help them.
Great, thank you so much, Amie, for
Thank you.
stopping by.
Delighted to be here.
感谢大家的观看。